Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SecureITsource Keys to Identity and Access Management webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is David Matos, co-founder of SecureITsource, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I also have with me today Jonathan Edwards, who's our Senior Director of IAM Strategy, and Mike Campbell, one of our Senior Identity Consultants, overall Okta Guru, and Okta Certified Consultant. So before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. First, everybody's going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, just enter them into the chat. We will try to get to everybody's questions at the end of the webinar. We'll also be able to capture all the questions, so if we're not able to get to all of them, we'll send a follow-up email to all participants with the questions and our responses. So a brief background on SecureITsource. We are a full-service identity consulting and professional services firm. We help our clients to deploy successful identity programs by offering advisory, architecture, and deployment engineering services. Our company also resells the industry's best-of-breed solutions, including Okta. Identity and access management is complicated. There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. This webinar is going to be the first in a series called Keys to Identity and Access Management. Today, we're going to focus on a topic that has been front and center for a lot of security professionals, mostly as a result of COVID-19. Most companies had to quickly shift to work from home environments, which highlights the need for flexible and scalable SSO and MFA solutions. So our main topics for today are going to include the following. First, what is SSO and MFA? What are the business drivers for adopting an SSO and MFA program? What is Okta's value as a solution provider? We're then going to talk and provide some context to what these projects look like and how long they can take. We will offer some perspective to challenges and lessons learned through the many deployments SecureITsource has successfully completed. And finally, we'll offer a view into how Okta, together with SecureITsource, can help. So, Jonathan, let me start by asking you, what is SSO and MFA?
Yeah, thanks, David. And, I also want to thank everybody for joining us today. I guess to simply answer your question, SSO or single sign-on is really a session and user authentication service, which allows users to use a single set of credentials to access their applications. MFA and multi-factor authentication is really a method to add an additional layer of validation after a user enters their initial credentials. So this usually consists of one of the following three categories. Something you know, which could be a PIN or a code, something you have, a smartphone or even a token, or even something you are, something like a fingerprint or biometrics in general.
That's a really good explanation, Jonathan. So can you explain why businesses would find this important?
Yeah, there's actually a number of reasons why organizations implement SSO and MFA methodologies. Let's take SSO. First, it's about improving user experience. There was actually a study done by LastPass in 2016, and that study showed that on average, users have over 190 passwords. So if we're able to limit the number of passwords that users are required to either remember or to manage, then we're able to, reduce downtime and increase productivity, decrease the number of help desk calls for password resets, all while you're still improving the supportability for IT. And secondly, unifying by using standards really help eliminate blind spots. So, security teams have always been worried about managing access, especially when someone leaves the organization. So this allows for faster and easier management of the accounts. And then lastly, for all the CISOs who are on the call, unification and standardization really help reduce your overall cost. They say a support ticket costs about $70 per ticket, So by applying these methodologies, you really can reduce your costs by over $1,000 per user per year. This doesn't even include the reduction of risk for failing audits. PCI audit findings alone can really cost an organization between $5,000 and $100,000 per month. MFA, on the other hand, is really focused on improving security. So although SSO is a great start, MFA really adds that additional layer of security. This gives organizations the ability to validate that users who are accessing the environment are truly trusted. And this reduces the overall attack surface and reduces the risk that can ultimately be tied directly to costs. So, and finally, organizations are starting to think about the future. They're talking about bring your own identity, zero trust, and even passwordless. Another big thing is customer single sign-on using third-party IDPs or identity providers such as Facebook. So they're really starting to see that the perimeter's changing. Users are really able to, or really need the ability to access their applications no matter where they sit, whether they're on premise or cloud or even SaaS. So if users are required to VPN into the organization's network, it really lowers the user experience and then increases the need for more support from IT. As an example, during this whole COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen organizations forced to abandon VPNs due to VPN overload. We had a customer go from 3% work from home to 80% basically overnight. So their VPN was just not able to handle the number of users who needed access. So with these things being the future, implementing a MFA solution is really key to continuing the ability to secure access.
Those are definitely some good reasons, Jonathan. And it's easy to talk about SSO and MFA, but I'd like to have a demo that we've put together to show everybody how this would work.
Hi, this is Jonathan from SecureITsource. We're partnering with Okta to help enable remote workforces and secure organizations. Today, we're going to show you how smooth the user experience is for accessing applications when using Okta Desktop SSO and the Okta Access Gateway. A fantastic new engineer just joined our team, Pat. It's her first day at the office, and she's going to log into her workstation for the first time. When she logs into the network, she's going to automatically be authenticated with Okta through Desktop SSO. And then, instead of her having to provide a username and password every time she wants to access an application or service, Okta handles the authentication in the background. This really improves her experience as an end user, while also making access to systems more secure. Since she's using Desktop Single Sign-On, she's able to start using Outlook without providing her credentials again. She opens up her email and sees that she has a message. Again, since Desktop SSO is handling her authentication in the background, Pat is able to open SharePoint seamlessly to review the standard operating procedures for her new position. You can provide your users access to their applications both when they're on your network and when they're off your network. Pat had a great first few days at work. Later that week, she's working from home and needs to check her email in Outlook online. Here, she's going to take advantage of the work from home features that Okta provides. We want to have additional verification that it's really Pat on the other end, since the connection is coming from outside our network. We've configured Okta to request multi-factor authentication when users are off network. So when she authenticates with Okta, she's going to be prompted on her Okta Verify app on her phone to confirm that she's logging in. Then, she'll be connected with SSO and can access all her applications just like she could on-premise. SSO with MFA is giving us a smoother user experience, while also helping us secure our organization as we move towards a zero-trust security model. In Outlook, Pat sees an email telling her that her access request to one of our legacy applications was approved. It uses passed-in headers for authentication and authorization, and although we're considering making it fully cloud-based someday, for now we want it to stay on site behind our firewall. Even so, Pat can still access our application securely by using Okta's Access Gateway. We had been using an old web access management solution to provide access to our app, but since it required a lot of infrastructure to support, we switched to Okta, since Okta allows us to provide access with fewer servers, without a VPN, and without hosting separate databases for authentication. Okta communicates with a secure gateway behind our firewall to handle the authentication with our on-premise application, and then she's in, just as seamlessly as with Office 365 and the other SaaS apps that we're using. Pat was able to access our cloud-based and on-premise apps both on and off our network, and we were able to use MFA to get additional assurance when we needed it that it was really her logging in. For Pat, the experience was smooth, and for us, it was easier to give her and our other employees access to the applications they need. Okta has helped us empower our organization to access applications easily and securely, whether we're working at the office or at home. Okta isn't just about SSO and MFA. They offer an identity platform full of features that are allowing organizations to be more agile and to get their services to market faster.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into Okta. Mike, Okta has what they call the OIN, or Okta Integration Network. Could you talk a little bit about what the OIN is and how it's helped revolutionize SSO?
Yeah, thanks, David. I like to think of the Okta Integration Network like an app store that contains pre-built Okta connectors for over 6,500 business applications. Similar to an app store, any application vendor can go into their own Okta environment, build out a connector for their application, and then publish it to the integration network. Of course, Okta has to approve it before it's added, but once it is, it's available to all of Okta's customers. And because of this, the list is continually growing. So you can bet that if one of your business apps isn't already on the OIN, there's a good chance it will be soon. Now, while most of the applications on the OIN are focused on single sign-on and making that very easy and very fast to stand up, over 130 of the integrations have full provisioning capabilities. So that includes creating and removing accounts that you'll be using single sign-on for. Those are really the integrations that win in terms of efficiency. And those are some of the most requested applications that we see. However, on single sign-on applications, most of them are SAML and OpenID Connect, and they make up a large chunk of the integrations on the OIN. While they're both open and modern standards, the terminology used can be quite confusing, especially to the application teams that you're working with. So if an application supports one of the standards, the language it uses inside of the application config may not necessarily be the same as it is in Okta. However, with any of the applications in the OIN, the terminology used is consistent across both. And in addition, specific instructions are provided which cover any of the potential gotchas that pop up in some of these SSO integrations. So we've actually found that application teams are coming to us first after hearing that their applications are in the OIN.
Yeah, and just to add to what Mike just said, most of the requested applications that our customers are coming to us and asking to integrate with Okta are actually already supported by Okta within the OIN. Even things like HR solutions like Workday and UltiPro, and larger applications like O365, Salesforce, even ServiceNow are all supported. So as Mike mentioned, this is an ever-growing list. And every year we expect to see more and more applications being available. But with that said, every industry has their own set of niche applications, and even applications that are legacy. And they want to integrate and utilize SSO and MFA. So Mike, Okta's motto is connect to everything. So how do organizations connect, say, those type of applications?
Yeah, like you said, Jonathan, Okta's core value really is connect to everything. And because of this, you're almost guaranteed that all of your applications can be connected to Okta in some fashion. If it's not already in the OIN, it probably supports SAML or OpenID Connect in a generic sense. And we always recommend our customers look for those. But for the cases where it doesn't support either of those, you can use secure web authentication or SWA, which is a protocol that Okta developed to connect to web-based applications. Those actually make up a bulk of the connectors in the OIN, and it helps us connect to some business applications that just weren't able to SSO into before. For more of your legacy applications, you're really looking at things like Okta's LDAP interface for connecting directly to a directory, or you're looking into the access gateway, which we saw in the demo. So with all of that, we haven't really seen a situation yet in which we can't make a connection back to Okta. One of the benefits also is that you're not locked into any specific vendor's ecosystem with Okta. They don't dictate that certain applications can or can't be connected because they heavily emphasize those open standards. Because of that, the knowledge you gain working through your projects with Okta, it increases your return on investment as you continue exponentially.
Yeah, Mike, connecting to applications is really a great selling point. You've done a lot of these projects in the past, but I think it'd be interesting to everybody on the call here to have an understanding of how long does it take to actually connect, let's say, out of the box applications, as well as some of the non-standard applications that you just referred to.
Yeah, so as you can see, we're seeing about an average of 20 hours of total effort to integrate with applications in the OIN. And that includes planning, testing in a preview and test environment, and then making the organization-wide switchover in production. So that's pretty incredible to be in a place where we can cover that much ground in a short period of time. As an example, one of the largest and most common integrations we see requested is Office 365. That one's an easy win because it spans a lot of different applications that most business users use every day. But the consistency of that integration across different devices, as well as the ability to migrate away from legacy mail protocols, are big security drivers for it. And you can onboard multiple Office 365 domains in one connector. So with all of that, the integration takes about 40 hours on average. And that's in the same realm of what non-OIN connected applications take. It's typically about 40 to 60 hours, all things considered for those. And then a final example is really your cloud platforms. So AWS, Google Cloud, those are big involved integrations as far as Okta goes, but Okta handles those use cases very nicely. For example, the effort to onboard multiple AWS accounts, we've seen upwards of 100 AWS accounts onboarded all with their own roles. The effort to onboard that is really not much more than just onboarding a single AWS account. And the integrations are only getting better over time.
That's great information, Mike. And Mike, you and Jonathan have both been involved in a lot of IAM projects. Could you guys talk about some lessons learned from an organizational level when implementing SSO and MFA? And Mike, if you wouldn't mind following up with some project-related and technical lessons that you've learned along the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just like any project, David, it's really important to get business leadership buy-in. We've seen organizations invest a lot in management level buy-in, but as soon as something's identified that it may affect users, we've seen these projects get shot down. So getting their buy-in is extremely important to the project success. We've also seen a lot of value in organizations building a steering committee that's comprised of app owners, security, and even business members. That's really helped define that roadmap for their identity program. And having a mix of people really helps reduce missing unexpected needs as well as some business requirements. And then, lastly, for making any decisions, before you're making any decisions on the direction, you really need to build an inventory of what your environment looks like. This really helps find the commonality across your organization. In understanding applications that you have, what their capabilities are, as well as the standards already being used in each of them, it really makes it easier to define your overall SSO and MFA policies as well as approaches.
Yeah, and once you understand, just to add, once you understand your applications at a base level, knowing the routes they take to reach the internet, which is where Okta is located, it's going to go a far way. That's easier for SaaS apps that are already there, but we have a lot of customers connecting their on-premise applications to Okta as well. So we always recommend working up front with your network and infrastructure teams to make sure firewalls, DNS, VPNs are prepared in order to avoid delays later on. Now, this is obviously easier said than done because Okta is sometimes the first time that many applications are being exposed to the internet. With that, you also have to account for user locations because they also need to reach Okta. Some of the other best practices and lessons learned now working with Okta are really around deciding if you want to use your existing directories inside of Okta, how to fine tune your session times, and deciding whether or not you want to account for authorization in the scope of your single sign-on projects. To start with delegated authentication, it's what Okta refers to as using your existing directories to authenticate into Okta. And it's really a good first step most of our customers take. And we do work with them to implement that, but then to transition them away from those legacy directories over time as they begin using Okta as their true source of identity. Then session timeouts, those are a oftentimes controversial topic, and they can range anywhere from 15 minutes to an average business day of 8 hours. Some of the factors that affect the session time are whether you're enforcing MFA at the network perimeter and whether you have infrastructure like desktop single sign-on in place. So usually when you use multi-factor, that allows you to have a bit of a longer session time as it's not as risky to have those sessions open. But on the flip side, if you're using desktop single sign-on internally, which you saw in the demo, session times can actually be decreased because your users aren't having to constantly key in their username and password every time they need to authenticate. So a combination is almost always recommended by us. And I do want to keep in mind that this is a very current view of our customers and where they're at. As they move towards zero trust policies and their perimeters change, these recommendations are changing with them. And then when we think of single sign-on, we often think just of authentication, but both SAML and OpenID Connect can handle authorization in one form or another. So if the applications that you're onboarding do support authorization, a common example is passing groups with SAML just in time. You should consider whether or not there's already an automated solution covering this. And if not, it can be an easy win for some organizations in the form of governance. And when we talk about MFA, the biggest lessons learned are really around BYOD, or bring your own device policies, and adaptive and step-up MFA. So with regard to the BYOD policies, that's really considering whether your employees can actually use their phones or devices when they need to do MFA, and also whether the company is going to manage those devices or not. Some of our customers can have their phones in the office, so they make use of physical tokens. In addition, some companies think they need to apply MFA to everything, but this causes a disconnect between the user experience and information security. So that's especially important with customer single sign-on. If your customers find it difficult to access your applications, they're going to stop using them, and that results in direct revenue loss. So a lot of us probably know that SMS is considered an insecure form of MFA nowadays. However, some of our customers are using it successfully because of the customer experience that it offers. Knowing when and where and what types of MFA to use is a balancing act between security and user experience. So we're seeing the use of adaptive and risk-based MFA and authentication growing rapidly. It makes use of additional factors to determine what situations are risky and should require that extra level of assurance. So this is good for both security and user experience.
Those are some great best practices, Mike. Could you walk us through what a standard SSO MFA project approach should look like? I think that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, sure. So the first step we normally always take as a company is performing a current state assessment. This normally leads right into building out the application inventory, as well as seeing what our next steps are as far as identity. And once you do have that application inventory, you need to sort out the applications that you have. So you're going to have your HR systems, you're going to have your directories, you're going to have applications of different criticality. This is going to help you gain a view of what your flows and then policies are going to look like once they're in Okta. Once they're categorized, it's a good idea to start looking at what options you have for connecting to Okta with them. And once you're past that, you really want to prioritize those applications in 2 phases so that you can start onboarding quickly. A necessary tool as you start getting into app onboarding, and even before that, is the questionnaire. So you're going to need a questionnaire for at least each type of connector that you have. And each SSO deployment is typically a big bang approach. So coordination between the app team and the IAM team is very critical to make sure it migrates successfully. And MFA can be rolled out gradually, and that's typically what we see and recommend. Normally, we'll want to get MFA in front of the critical user base, like administrators, sooner rather than later, with a more gradual rollout for the general user populations.
Thank you for that, Mike, and thank you both, Jonathan and Mike. Those were great best practices and explanations for our audience here. So, a couple things to wrap up and talk a little bit about how we can help. SecureITsource is a full lifecycle professional services and consulting firm, and we are exclusively focused in identity. We are a partner for our clients at all stages of their identity program journey. So what does that really mean? First, advisement. We can help you to conduct an agnostic view of where you are in the identity journey and help you to build a roadmap to success. Because identity is invasive, we can help you to consider all the factors that influence an identity program, including business drivers, compliance needs, operations, technology. Building a vision with a roadmap that has priorities is the best foot forward in building a successful identity program. Secondly, we can help you to architect a technical path that considers best practices, takes into account dependencies, and leverages the best features and functionality of the solutions that you choose to deploy. As we all said earlier, identity is not easy. Our team's experience doing hundreds of successful deployments gives us the practical knowledge that allows us to avoid pitfalls that can result in a lot of rework and save basically a lot of time and money. And finally, we can help in deployment engineering and solution development. We offer hands-on assistance from certified consultants who are experts in identity. Everybody on our team is full-time employee with us and certified by the vendors themselves as subject matter experts. So for a complete review and overview of SecureITsource, you feel free to hit our website, which is listed here. There you can read our blogs, you can download our case studies, white papers, and ebooks. So let's turn to some of the questions that came up during the webinar, and we can go through some of these. first question we have here is, how should you phase in SSO and MFA? Mike, do you think you could take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I started to touch on this at the end, but it's when you phase in single sign-on, really the key is you do want to try and work with quick timelines because you want to get your often used applications into Okta quickly. You don't want your users using Okta for some applications and non-single sign-on for other applications. So I also mentioned that single sign-on is often a big bang approach that requires coordination, but some applications like ServiceNow and Salesforce, which are common ones, they support multiple identity providers. So you can onboard Okta and test relatively quickly. So when you see those opportunities, you want to start on those early on. As far as multi-factor authentication, that's you do want to target your most critical users first. MFA is all about security, but when you start thinking about MFA, you really want to look into what you can accomplish on the org-wide level versus setting MFA for each application that you onboard because it takes more time to determine that. So if you can come up with some organization-wide policies around multi-factor and when to prompt for it, it makes the whole process a lot easier and quicker.
Appreciate that, Mike. Got a few more questions. So is SSO MFA a long-term strategy for authentication or just a stepping stone? Jonathan, could you take that one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I knew it was coming to me. You know, I love talking about the future of identity. But you know, this is actually a really good question. You know, we actually see that SSO and MFA is really kind of the first step in securing your access. You know, and as Mike and I both kind of talked about, you know, organizations are, you know, starting to look at the kind of how do I modernize, but more importantly, how do I, you know, how do I reduce friction for users? You know, so as they're moving towards kind of that zero trust model, you know, their authentication methods are starting to evolve, and they're evolving towards, you know, like I mentioned, the third-party IDPs, even tokenization or ephemeral credentials, and you know, they're even starting to invest in AI, right? So they're using AI to actually build profiles for their users and then monitor the behaviors. And then, you know, because they have those profiles built, then they can prompt for MFA based on risk or when they're accessing, let's say, sensitive information.
Appreciate that, Jonathan. So we got a couple more questions here. So what authentication protocols do you see new application developers aligning to? And what is the latest and greatest? Mike, can you take that one?
Sure. So we are for new applications being built, especially for customers. We see OpenID Connect being the primary tool for authentication there, with OAuth 2 being used for authorization underneath. It should almost always go that way nowadays because the integrations can be pretty tightly built in and integrated, but Okta offers it as a service, so it's really easy to get up and going with it. But there's some other things that are coming up. FAPI for financial APIs is new policies and is a new layer on OpenID Connect that I see gaining traction with our financial clients, where monetary transactions are involved in the flow, and it just adds some additional protections and concerns. But otherwise, I mean, customers are moving away from using the implicit flow in OAuth to making use of PXE, which is a more secure alternative. It introduces another step into the OAuth process, but is a bit more secure. And then just OAuth 3, which It's still kind of in the talks. There's still debates about whether it should be an extension of OAuth 2 or built from the ground up, but that is going to have impact into OpenID Connect and how it's used in the future for applications. So we're definitely keeping track of all that and seeing where it heads.
Appreciate that, Mike. So I'm just gonna ask anybody out there if there's any other questions. And if there are not, we really appreciate everybody's time today, and thanks for joining us for the first part of this series. We look forward to seeing everybody for another webinar soon. You will get a recording of the webinar and some follow-up questions as well as they come in. Appreciate everybody's time. Have a great weekend.